In this packed Democratic primary field, for all of the differences between the candidates, and there are many, one that has created the most sort of drama on the debate stage, but also might be the most important and substantive going forward, is their theory on money, how they've raised money for their campaigns and what they think should happen with campaign finance going forward. Joining us now to discuss this, we have staff writer for the American Prospect, Alex Salmon. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Thanks so much for having me.
Glad to have you here. I very much enjoyed your write-up of sort of the different camps of, in terms of campaign finance, how they're funding their campaigns for the Democratic field. And I want to delve into all that. But first, for people who might not be familiar, can you break down what are the different groupings, basically?
Absolutely. So there's basically three different schools of thought on this and three separate camps. The first, and I think probably the most headline grabbing, has been what Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have done with their small dollar fundraising. And obviously they've posted some huge fundraising totals. Sanders in particular has broken records basically every quarter and every month at this point with his fundraising totals. And Warren has been close behind. And the two of them are both kind of running these campaigns entirely on small dollar donations, which is something that really hasn't been done at the presidential level. It's a serious leap of faith, and so far it's been very successful. And then kind of on the far end of the other spectrum, or the far other end of the spectrum rather, is the self-funded billionaires. And so we have obviously Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg, who are basically, because of their endless financial might, enacting essentially an end run around the democratic process and spending incomprehensible amount of money to put together a campaign with very little input from people, donors, and democratic sources. And then the kind of leftover group in the middle, which used to be the what everyone did, the most traditional bunch, is the kind of traditional fundraisers, and that's Joe Biden, that's Pete Buttigieg, and that's a lot of candidates who've dropped out: Cory Booker, Julian Castro, Amy Klobuchar, obviously still in, and they kind of have some small dollar donations, but the majority of their funding comes from high dollar events, access events. They have bundlers who raise big sums for them, and they rely on super PACs.
And in your article, you talk about why that group has been particularly weak. Why is that in this particular cycle?
It's an interesting trend that's developed, and it's something we haven't seen before. But I think in part because of the billionaire class, which used to be content to sit on the sidelines and kind of pay for their politicians, pay for their access. In this cycle, they've decided that they actually need to be active in the process and run themselves. And so obviously Bloomberg is the best example of that. And with so many of those candidates competing for big money from Wall Street, from fossil fuel industry, from you name it, there actually hasn't been that much money to go around. And at the end of the day, despite this kind of enthusiastic embrace of big money that we've seen from people like Pete Buttigieg or Joe Biden, who obviously has a super PAC, there actually hasn't been that much money for them, even despite their kind of enthusiastic embrace of big money. So that's where we've seen a lot of these dropouts, and it's an interesting development, something that we haven't seen before.
And so I want to update people in case they didn't see that it was revealed today that in January of this year, Bernie Sanders apparently raised $25 million, which is just a crazy sum. But at the same time, you have Tom Steyer, but even more so, Michael Bloomberg, willing to spend the GDP of a small country every quarter. And so I'm curious, you talk in the article about how self-funders, much of the time in the past, have ended up losing not only a lot of money, but also their bids. Is there something about Mike Bloomberg or Tom Steyer that you think might break that pattern?
Well, we've never seen anything like Mike Bloomberg in the political process before. And that's the byproduct of the kind of incredible inequality, wealth inequality we currently have in this society. And there have obviously been rich self-funders, and it hasn't been a particularly effective mode of intervening in the political process. It's largely been a kind of a doomed vanity effort. But Bloomberg has the financial might that Bloomberg brings to the table is almost unthinkable. His commitment to spend at least $1 billion to get this done. The average week for Bloomberg, he spends over $40 million on television ads. That's more than Bernie Sanders raises in a record-setting quarter. And so we're talking about a scale here that we haven't seen before. And I think it's no sure thing that Bloomberg will pull this off, but we have to take seriously what he's doing because the money does, at the end of the day, the money does work to some degree. The question is how much can it work, and Bloomberg is going to basically take that question to its logical end here. We'll see how far it goes.
I have to mention that I think it's amazing that right now there's like an ongoing, both on cable news and social media, back and forth over whether it is fair to call Bloomberg an oligarch when you can take like the record-breaking Q4 numbers of Bernie Sanders, and every week Bloomberg blows that out of the water in money that effectively he earns back in interest on his wealth, in that same time period. So you're not obligated to comment on that, but I do think it's noteworthy when we're talking about campaign finance. So
yeah, absolutely.
I guess what I'm curious about is, in terms of the desire for reform, and you talk at the end of your article about campaign finance reform, I'm interested in, depending on who ends up winning this thing, with the experiences we've seen of the traditional mode sort of falling to the wayside, new evidence of how strong small dollar funding can be, but also this new thing of mega billionaires running. What implications do you think that has for the desire for campaign finance reform coming out of this season?
Well, it seems to me that we have with these kind of two countervailing forces pulling in opposite directions. It's clear that the current system is extremely broken. I mean, far beyond our wildest imagination. I think has it been broken by just how much money has kind of seeped into every pore of the process, and that's obviously a byproduct of Citizens United, which we're now into the second decade of, and that decision. And it's a byproduct of extreme inequality. I think that, the outcome makes a big difference here. So, if Bloomberg is able to pull this off and he somehow ends up becoming the nominee, and then he somehow ends up becoming president, I'm not sure what that gets you, because this is not a model that can be replicated at scale. There's not that many. I mean, there are some, but there are not that many billionaires. You can't have a Democratic Party that's going to be staffed at every level, in the House, the Senate, and the school board by these kinds of people. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure where that gets you. That to me seems to set an incredibly dangerous precedent where if Bloomberg wins, I don't know. I'm not sure what comes next. If one of the
Jeff Bezos, presumably.
Right, exactly. And that's the other thing is that Bloomberg is incomprehensibly wealthy. Bezos is twice as wealthy as he is. Mm-hmm. So, what is this? If Bezos sets his sights on an office, on a piece of legislation, on anything, what's to say that he can't do whatever he wants in the political process? So
exactly.
I'm not sure where this gets us. I think people are right to be wary of this, and I think it will just add to the call for campaign finance reform. But I have a hard time believing that someone who essentially bought the office is then going to turn around and say, "I'm going to shut down the system that allowed me to do this." I don't think Bloomberg is going to be the great champion of campaign finance reform, and I don't think we should wait on him as our best and final hope for that.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you there. Alex Salmon, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody watching this, there's a lot more information in the article, which is available at the American Prospect. You should definitely check it out. Alex, thank you again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.